Alrighty, thank you so much for joining me, Chemistry. For our wine today, we are going to be sampling the McBride Sisters Collection Sauvignon Blanc that you can find in any major grocery store. Very, very good. It has notes of like citrus and it's a little bit sweet, but not too much. I really enjoyed it. This actually isn't my first time trying it. And I buy it pretty often. So I'm excited to be indulging in that a little bit while we talk about Reconstruction. We're going to need it. Would you like to give a quick background of yourself and your foundation?
Yeah, my name's Chemistry. I am the president and founder of the Black Party Foundation. It is dedicated to teaching Black history after school. It's a 2-hour program. As of right now, we'll be using African American students from the local HBCUs who major in African American studies to teach these classes to right now high schoolers, but I'm trying to get it universal. I'm wanted through K through 12, and then possibly and potentially even collegiate levels. But for right now, we're based in Atlanta. We're starting small. If you want to know how to donate or more about my nonprofit, we have a website called the blackpartyfoundation.org. Or you can check out my TikTok, which is Kim Possible, Chempossible. That's where I teach a lot of my Black history online, but as of right now, I'm working on getting it in person. So I could use your help, your donation, your support. Please check us out.
Awesome. And we'll also be putting a link to the foundation in the show notes. So definitely go check them out and donate if you feel so inclined. I know I'll be. So to get into Reconstruction, I think the best place to start is just right with the end of the Civil War. So to set the scene, it's April 9th, 1865, and the Confederate Army has just surrendered to the Union troops. So, one of the main factors in the Union victory was obviously the Emancipation Proclamation. And so we all commonly recognize this as kind of like the beginnings of freedom for enslaved people. But I think it's a really common misconception that Lincoln and the Union in general issued the Emancipation Proclamation out of like this moral obligation to free enslaved people, when in reality it was military strategy because they needed bodies. I mean, they needed people to fight in the war, and that was the main reason. It was really twofold because they needed people to help the Union Army and to fight, but they also wanted to take wealth away from the wealthy landowners and planters in the South in the form of their enslaved people. So, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the reasoning behind this strategy and what kind of experience were Black soldiers having in the Union Army.
Yeah, I'm happy that you mentioned the ulterior motives of the Union and of Abraham Lincoln, but I do want to throw in there as well. It was a constant conversation of what to do with Black people once slavery was going to come to an end. One thing that the unions, even the Confederates, knew that, but they didn't want to admit, was that slavery was not going to be forever. They tried and fought as hard as they could so that it could last as long as it could. But when it came to this strategy of freeing, and I'm going to use the word free loosely because we all know Juneteenth is a thing, and my grandfather being a victim of slavery up until the 90s, we free is used loosely. But we do look at it as, oh, it was a strategy move. We've moved from looking at it as it freed the slaves to now we're in this enlightened period where we can embrace and acknowledge that it was a political and war strategy. But I think a lot of it was really just Lincoln and the Union realizing that this was coming to an end. You know what I mean? It was coming to an end, and they had to find some way, something that could, I guess you could say, I always say, kind of make them look better when it comes to the grand scheme of things. You know what I mean? Like, of course, like I said, everybody knew that this wasn't going to be forever. So I feel like the strategy of freeing the slaves, we all know that that was a big, big part of the Civil War. On top of like the South being rich and the North being broke. But when it comes to like the strategy of freeing the slaves, it was not with Black people's in like interests at heart at all. And I hate even using the word slave. I'm going to try and use enslaved Africans because slavery was their, was the situation that they were in. And I hate to just diminish those human beings to slaves, but I feel like it wasn't meant to do any good to us. And when it comes to Black soldiers fighting in the Union, a lot of these Black people, they were literally coerced into the army. It was either you stay on this plantation or you can come up here with us, and when we win, you'll have your freedom. It's very similar to what happened with Nova Scotia when the Black people in New York were basically They were convinced. They were convinced to fight against, you know, the in the war, the Revolutionary War, and they ended up getting sent to Nova Scotia and forgotten about. You know what I mean? And it's very much the same thing that's happened here. Is these black soldiers? They just wanted to prove themselves. They wanted to defend themselves. And they wanted to defend the family that they know that they had down south. What's not talked about a lot in that conversation with black soldiers is there was knowledge that we have family down south. I have, if I'm a free black person up north, I know for a fact I have family down there. You know what I mean? So for black people, the war was different. We were fighting two different wars. The white Union soldiers and Abraham Lincoln and all his people, they were fighting to keep what we know what they were fighting for. But black people, we were fighting for our freedom. We were fighting for our people's freedom, and not to mention our place in this country. You know what I mean? Like we weren't accepted at all. So it was kind of like a way for us to say, okay, well, I'm going to defend this country. After I'm done defending this shit, though, this is my country. This land is your land. This land is my land.
Absolutely. And I think I really like that you touched on the kind of pattern that we're seeing here. You know, with slavery, you can definitely see a pattern of using Black people for labor and then kind of forgetting about them afterwards. Obviously, that's an extreme during slavery, but you can see that also with the Proclamation and the deputizing of, you know, formerly enslaved people, newly free people into the Union Army. And most of the time, they were not getting paid as much as the white soldiers were, or really at all. And they were doing the worst jobs out of the bunch. And so that's something that I think is not really touched on. I think most of the time people just say, you know, oh, the Emancipation Proclamation came, everybody was free, they were so excited to fight in the war. Like, probably not. I mean, do you
And
know
you know what's
excited to
crazy?
fight?
We don't talk about how black people Abraham Lincoln did not want black people in the army. He did not want them. If he wanted them in the army, it was not to be bearing arms. He knew, first of all, he was a racist himself. He understood that it would. He thought it would be dangerous to have a black man toting around a gun after just being enslaved, after seeing how brutal these people are. He saw that, and he understood that other white people saw that. So in an attempt, and that's why I say a lot of times in this conversation, like when it comes to Abraham Lincoln's role, he tried even during the war, to make sure that there was some level of peace or some like he was straddling the fence. Like even when it came to not allowing black men to bear arms and defend themselves with weapons, it was because he knew that people in the South thought how he thought, like that they're not going to take well to a black man walking around with a gun and now he has the authority to command other white people. You know what I mean? So like a lot of people don't think about that, but it took so much for Abraham Lincoln to even allow black soldiers to fight in the war. And then the war started to change. They started to win because the Confederacy was whooping the Union's ass at first. As soon as the black soldiers stepped in, is that's when they started to get the upper hand. They started to be able to make some progress toward the end of it. You know what I mean? So a lot of people don't talk about that. I just want to throw that in there.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned how at the beginning of the war, the Union was not doing well. They were really like they were losing hard. Like it was really not looking good. And the Emancipation Proclamation was like a critical piece of the Union victory. And the Black soldiers who fought in the Civil War, like it couldn't have been won without them. Like the Civil
Yeah,
War could not have been won without Black soldiers. We just know that as fact. And speaking of Abraham Lincoln, I kind of want to talk about the quick transition because obviously on April 9th, the Confederates surrender. And then on April 15th, Abraham Lincoln is assassinated.
yeah,
So this guy has like 5, 6 days to revel in it, and then he's dead. And so whatever his vision was for Reconstruction, this all now falls to his vice president, Andrew Johnson, who's actually a Democrat from Tennessee, and definitely not on the same wavelength as Lincoln and other like establishment Republicans that were in Congress. So, could you explain for a second how Johnson's plan differed from the like Abraham Lincoln's vision and what the Republicans in Congress were kind of envisioning and what impact this had on the country, especially taking into account the fact that right after Johnson got inaugurated, Congress was on recess for like 5 months. So he just
right.
had unchecked power.
Yeah, so when it comes to the transition from Lincoln to Johnson, I think first of all, um, we have to acknowledge that it was a crucial part in American history. That was one of the most flexible parts of our history that I can remember. because it really did draw out our future, the future that we live right now, this present, right? So when it comes to Johnson and President Lincoln, I can give him, okay, so I can admit Johnson was very much against big planters. He didn't like the rich family. He didn't like the oligarchy, all that. Like he wasn't really big on making sure that these wealthy families stay wealthy. He came from a poor background. Johnson was poor, so he hated that. That's where he was impartial, or not even impartial, but that was where he was against slavery. It wasn't like he was against black people being enslaved. He could care less about the black person. It was more or less about a bunch of like a group of people owning most of the slaves and most of the wealth, and he got to grow up on the other side of seeing what it looks like
Class
to be
issue
poor.
for him.
So when it came to Abraham Lincoln, Abe wanted to keep slavery. Like I said, I will always die on that hill. Before he even enacted Emancipation Proclamation, he offered to allow slave owners to keep their slaves for what, 10, 20 years and gradually end it, right? He wanted to gradually end it, just like President Monroe. Anyway, sorry. But he wanted to gradually end it. When it comes to Johnson, Johnson didn't necessarily want to gradually end it. He wanted to end it like officially because he didn't see how he could find an end, right? When it comes to President Johnson and me, like how I feel, he was more or less like the poor kid that grew up and got a little bit of power and wanted to take it out on the rich people. Abraham Lincoln, he was more or less he was thinking about the democracy and then the country or whatever, his countrymen. When I say his countrymen, I mean his white countrymen. And he was willing to do whatever he needed to make sure that he got that there was some sort of I guess you could say some sort of union between the Union and the Confederacy. Johnson, on the other hand, he kind of went in and did things his own way. Granted, we both know that Johnson and Abe, they agreed that each state would be able to do whatever they wanted with their black citizens, which is how we got black codes and things like that. They agreed that I believe 10%, was it 10% of each state had to agree. I don't have it pulled up here.
Yeah, 10% had to swear allegiance to the Union and like renounce the Confederacy, which is like nothing. 10%
Literally, it's
is
literally
like
just saying,
literally
okay, fine, I'm on your side. Like, so when it comes to Johnson and Abe, I mean, of course, he was his vice president, so they shared a lot of similarities when it came to what they wanted to do after the Civil War. But considering that the a lot of this happened fast, like you said, Abe died 5 days after, right? And then not to mention the Confederacy kind of surrendered. It wasn't like they had a conversation. This was literally just like an abrupt surrender. Nobody really, I don't think they really had a plan really on what to do the day after the end of the war. I don't think they even saw it into the war. I'm not going to lie to you. So when it comes to what Johnson did and what I've read that Abe Lincoln wanted, I think Johnson took a little bit of what Abe wanted to do, but Johnson always had his own ideas. He's been very opinionated. One thing that I've read about fucking President Johnson, he's opinionated, okay, on paper. But like, and he always wanted to just make sure that there wasn't a large amount of wealth given to a bunch of Southerners. Like that was his main thing. That was his main thing. So much so that after the war was ended, like you put in the thing there, he pardoned some 20,000 people in an attempt to get slavery back. You know what I mean? Like, but it wasn't just to these rich planters. It was open to everybody. You know what I mean? So I feel like that's the
actually.
difference. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, totally. And I'm glad you brought up the pardons because I think this goes into this mindset that he has because he was born to like a poor farming family in Tennessee. And he does have this huge disdain for the wealthy planter population, not because he thinks that, Black people deserve human rights or that you shouldn't enslave people, because it's really a class issue for him. Like he doesn't like that there's these huge monopolies on planting and that there's, this huge wealth divide within his state. And he has this really, really like this power trip almost when he becomes president to where he can now have these wealthy planters come and beg him for a pardon. This is like an upper hand that he has never had. And he's like a fucking kid in a candy store, this shit. And so the poor Southern planters who were part of the Confederacy, they could just write him a letter. But the rich people had to go see him in person and make a call to Washington, D.C., to the Oval Office to personally beg him for forgiveness, which I think is kind of funny when you really think about it, because you can just see like this man with like this intense jealousy and this like, it's like small little dick brain almost, where he's like, this is
Mhm.
the one bargaining chip that I have, and like this is my chance to make these people feel small who have made me feel small my entire life. And he really like used that to his advantage. And he was basically like all they had to do is say like, love you, Andrew, like no worries. And
Kiss
like
his
he
feet,
would
kiss
pass
the
out,
ring.
yeah. He'd pass them out a pardon, no problem. And I mean, who else does that remind us of? Like, what
Right.
modern president do we know that gives out pardons to people who I really think that it has to do with and it's an ego thing, I think.
Definitely. It is like you use the right word, the abuse of power. I feel like when it came to I say that he was the worst person to be president at
Yeah.
that time. Now, granted, nobody good, succeeded him. Like a bunch of other bullshit people came after him. But I feel like we wouldn't have the present day that we have now if it weren't for Lincoln. Only because I can give it to Lincoln that he tried his damnedest to at least make it seem like he cared about black people. He tried his damn. He wanted us to think right now. Johnson, no, no. As soon as he realized that he couldn't do a whole lot with all these black people, and he was noticing that the black people are actually utilizing these rights that we gave them, oh no, 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 no. I'm gonna pardon all of y'all. Y'all come get these niggas and do what y'all gonna need to do with them because we can't allow another civil war. And we can't allow that these people, and not to mention this all happened as black people started to run for office, right? It was hundreds of black people running for different forms of office, whether it be fucking sheriff, whether it be some sort like everywhere. And it was just like, oh shit, they're gonna take over. You know what I mean? And I mean that's something that is no longer just oh hearsay or my opinion. It's true. Like when you actually read these documents and hear the little snippets of them talking, these are the words they use. Like they're going like we black people are going to overpower them because they can't get in their mind that we just aren't like that. You know what I mean? So that's why I feel like Johnson, he didn't really care if black people thought he was a good person. Abraham Lincoln, he wanted to at least. He, you
Yeah.
know,
You at least cared what other people thought. I mean, at least a little bit. He had a better PR team.
yeah, most definitely. I need that.
I mean, still today, I mean, like we can say that Abraham Lincoln was one of the better US presidents. Like I don't think anyone is denying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I mean, the way that we venerate him today in our society is though like he's a god or like this like really, really crucial like human rights advocate, more than even like, you see people like Martin Luther King or like real human rights advocates that were, very important. I feel like Abraham Lincoln is placed at the very top and
I
it's
feel
because
like
of who
Abe,
we are.
he has the benefit of having a bunch of horrible people to compare him to. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? Like it's almost like the literal lesser of two evils.
Hmm.
Um, and he definitely takes he ranks it. I mean, as far as like that era goes, right? I
Hmm.
feel like when it comes to people's perception of Abraham Lincoln, it's a lot. It's a lot to do with what we learn in schools. I tell you, everything we learn in schools affects how we look at everything we consume today. People watching this stream right now, whether they believe me or you or not, they have already had some idea of how Reconstruction went, right? And Abraham Lincoln was at the head of that. He's the reason that black people are free. And it's kind of like I blame the school system, and that's also why I started my program because what the fuck? Like, what the fuck? No, like none of this shit's true. But that's why I'm happy we're doing this because you need to know. You need to know.
Absolutely. And just touching once more on like this unchecked power that Andrew Johnson has, I don't think people realize that Congress used to literally go on recess for like 5 months because Congress
Right.
was never supposed to be a full-time job. Like when Congress was developed and like America was founded or whatever, the idea was that like it'll be like farmers and normal people who will do their day jobs and then go do Congress. And so that was still the system we were operating under during Reconstruction. And so right after Andrew Johnson was inaugurated, Congress, this is in like May, Congress goes on recess until December. So he has this huge span of time where there's a 100% Republican Congress that's going to have backlash against everything he tries to put forward, and they're not in the building. And so he's really pushing through like a lot of reforms quickly. And I feel like we usually will say reforms as though it's a good thing. In this situation, it was not. And beyond the pardons, one of the main things that he did was set up these, what were supposed to be temporary governments in all of the Confederate states. and give them control over how they were going to set up Reconstruction. It's like a very laissez-faire, like hands-off approach that he was taking. And he was just saying, well, we'll leave it up to the states, which why would you? You know, these are
It,
people who
it
just
defeats the
seceded.
purpose of the war. It literally defeats the purpose of the war.
No, absolutely. And so, I mean, I think that's really the beginning of this issue. I feel like the issue is really rooted in those early decisions made by Andrew Johnson, which just like totally undermined the entire process of Reconstruction. And you brought up earlier this idea that a lot of the white politicians had at the time of like, what are we going to do with all these people? You know, we have all these people who used to be enslaved, now they're free, like almost 4, 5 million people. What's the plan here? And there's that to address. But something I also wanted to address is like, there's this own kind of turmoil going on within the formerly enslaved community because you know, have maybe been separated from your family. You are now like essentially homeless. And enslaved people weren't able to read or write, like they weren't allowed to learn. And so you're left basically defenseless after the war is over. Like maybe the men would go off and fight, but then after that, it's like figure it out. And so like the Black community is doing its own reconstruction in a way that's separate from the national reconstruction of just like trying to find family members, like trying to find places to live, like trying to figure out what's next. And so I was wondering if you could just like speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm so happy you talked about that. So when it comes to, I mean, I call it the Black Reconstruction, but the Black side of Reconstruction, we could care less what the fuck was going on with the small planters and we free. You know what I mean? Like we free.
Mhm.
And literally, as soon as we got our right, we walked off that plantation with nothing, with nothing. Like literally imagine walking out your house right now with nothing, barely even clothes, but we knew we had something brighter. It was in our future. And one thing I've read of, like, I've read so many different accounts. Like I keep thinking about the survivors of the Catilda and about like all of these different slave, like the is it Works Project? I think it's the Work Project.
Oh, the one of the are you talking about that was implemented during the Great Depression? It was like a New Deal thing
Yeah.
and where they did the interviews.
Yes, I keep reading
Yes.
about that. And when you hear these people talk, these were once people that didn't have no hope, no nothing, no faith, no nothing. And the way that they talked about how they felt the day they walked off, they didn't give a fuck what was in front of them because it wasn't that. You know what I mean? So
Yep.
when we once we did get our bearings together and we were able to pull money together, we were able to sell watermelon and we were able to do all these different things, use the crafts and skills that we've acquired over these umpteen
Mhm.
hundred years, like, and actually build our own stuff. That's when we started to get a lot of Black cities and a lot of Black, like, just, I love how beautiful that small moment was for Black people after the Civil War. Like it was, I mean, I hate the bad side of it because of course nothing was beautiful for us ever actually in this fucking country. But for a lot of us, we actually found community. You know what I mean? We found our people, and I can't imagine what it would feel like to be separated from my family for so long, generations, and finally like reconnect with that. You know what I mean? Like in that essence, the essence of that reunion must have felt amazing. So like when you think about like the Black side of Reconstruction, yeah, you can look at it as we walked off the plantation, we didn't have shit, we didn't know what we was gonna do, we wasn't smart, you know what I mean? But we still made it work, right?
Yes.
Otherwise we wouldn't be here today. You know what I mean? Like we, honestly, when you think about it, we wouldn't be here today. The effects of Reconstruction, yeah, they affected us, of course, but I feel like it really showed us what we made of. You know what I mean? So like when you think about Reconstruction and when you think about people like fleeing from the South to the North and things like that, it was hard, yes, but I always try to find that silver lining, and that's a beautiful silver lining. I'm
Absolutely.
not sure if you talked about like what to do with Black people, but even during um, what's it called, during the war, during and before the war, I went over it on my TikTok about the ACS, the American Colonization Society. America never really knew what to do. That was with their free population, but the ACS was also buying slaves to free them, to send them to Monrovia and to Liberia, right? So the conversation of like, I forgot how you worded it, how you worded your question. Um, but when it comes to like what America was going to do with Black people, I don't feel like America had a plan for it. That's where I
They
was
had
getting
no
at.
plan. Yeah.
When I tell you they don't, I truly don't think they knew what they were going to do. I don't think they saw the war coming to an end. I
Mhm.
don't think they saw the war coming to an end. That's why they started to scatter. That's why they started to spend billions of dollars sending us to Liberia just to stop. You know what I mean? Like they started to literally scramble. Um, I'm not sure if that answers your question,
No,
but
it totally does. And I think like what you were saying about the resilience of like these, Black communities and formerly enslaved people during this time, you see it throughout Reconstruction. We're going to touch on it, but from the moment of emancipation, you can see like the resilience of people just like trying to move forward and trying to figure out what's going to happen next. And I mean, from the Emancipation Proclamation like onward, you see like newspaper articles with, people putting out ads for like their lost brothers and sisters, and it will say, like I'm looking for, my brother, whatever, he was sold on this day and he probably lives in like Mississippi or Louisiana. Like any information is appreciated. Like people just really trying to find their family members. And I think that that's really a testament to like this attitude of like not giving up and trying to rebuild and trying to reconnect and just like keep moving forward, I guess. And Reconstruction really, I mean, we're going to talk about it in this next question, but the government tried. I mean, they didn't, but they like attempted a little bit to like put some organizations in place to like kind of help, facilitate this transition from like a society that had, slave labor to this free society with equality. But it none of it really worked. What the only things that truly worked, like the only true successes of Reconstruction, I think we can attribute to like the Black communities themselves and like community organizing within themselves.
Mhm. You can also, I mean, it was more or less early 1900s, but even other immigrant communities. When it comes to how America, I mean, America has never really treated anybody that isn't a fucking blonde hair, blue eyed
Wasp.
white woman or
Yeah.
man, and with any respect. But when it came to immigrants, and I'm including like East Europeans and things like that, right? America never really accepted difference or change. And when it comes to Reconstruction, we'll talk about it. What Reconstruction showed me after doing all the research is that the South, white Southerners, they were fighting change. They were being the most patriotic they've ever been by not allowing change. You know what I mean? Um, when it comes to like situations, organizations that was created to disperse Black people, even those the ACS and everything alike was literally created to attempt to avoid change, right?
Mhm.
Because ACS was literally created after the Haitian Revolution. That was when Haiti had told the world, if y'all slaves revolt, y'all gonna win. So the world's response was, okay, we got to get rid of all of our free people that can read, that can find out about this, get them away from our slave class. Exactly that. The thing about the Haitian Revolution, how it ties to Reconstruction and the ACS, is in the Haitian Revolution, the free class, the free Black people in Haiti were colluding with the enslaved. So even those organizations that they created to disperse or help Black people get whatever the fuck, it was literally created to avoid change. I think that is, and I know you didn't ask, but I feel like that is like the main take I take from Reconstruction. The fact that it's called Reconstruction and they were fighting change at every fucking step. At every step.
Exactly. I don't think anyone, which it's shocking for us to think now, but I really don't think that anybody in the North and especially in the former Confederate States were really like envisioning a total shift or like a total transition of formerly enslaved people like actually gaining like economic and political equality with white people. Like I think they thought we'll free all the enslaved people and like they'll kind of do whatever, but white people are still going to be like the number one tier of society. I don't think anybody envisioned that Black people would, for example, run for political office or,
Right.
become public speakers or, open up newspapers. I don't think anyone really saw that coming. And I feel like that was like such a shock to the system for the North and the South that their reaction was just so visceral and like oftentimes very violent.
Yeah. And it shows their nature.
Mhm.
It shows their nature for sure. This country was breeding violent people. This country was accepting of it so much that that was the American way.
Yes.
That when it became illegal to kill a slave, the entire South rioted.
Hmm.
When it became illegal to kill a Black person, the entire South rioted. There were 45 riots within 2 years after that, and I feel like it speaks to something that we don't talk about.
Yeah.
It's something, and it's crazy that we're even today we're one of the most probably violent countries. We're very violent. People across the seas, the way they talk about us, like they just walk around with guns, like, and it truly it's just us being patriotic.
Mhm.
And we can see it back in Reconstruction. That was
Absolutely.
their response, was to just massacre Black
Absolutely.
people.
And I kind of want to touch on some of the programs that were implemented through Reconstruction or like some of the attempts that the government was making once Congress was back in session. So this was all ha this everything from now on is happening once Congress gets back and is essentially like, what the fuck did you just do? Like, what is going on? Like, this is not working. And one of the things that they implemented was the Freedmen's Bureau. So, for those who don't know, the Freedmen's Bureau was essentially a government agency that was um, first created during the Civil War, and then it was extended through Reconstruction to like aid. The idea was that they would aid this transition in the South and like provide protections to Black people and provide, aid to, poor white farmers and, formerly enslaved people alike and kind of like ease this transitional period. However, it was completely understaffed and underfunded from the beginning. And the crazy part is this was seen as like a progressive, controversial like implementation, which is just insane. President Johnson vetoed it at first, and Congress, because it was majority Republican at the time, actually had to override the veto to get it passed. And it was like not even close to scratching the surface of being enough. And so we're going to talk about the Freedmen's Bureau a little bit more, but I first wanted to ask you, were there any successes that you would say could be attributed to the Freedmen's Bureau? And like mostly what were their shortcomings?
Hell yeah. The Freedmen's Bureau, I have a love-hate relationship with it. I can say that when it comes to me and how I look at education, education is one of the most powerful tools that you could use. And I like the fact that the Freedmen's Bureau, I mean, a lot of the people doing the work on the ground were Black men, but they built a lot of schools.
Mhm.
And that's something that I feel doesn't get talked about enough when it comes to the Freedmen's Bureau. Um, they also had, I like their efforts. I feel like they've made a lot of effort to uniting Black people and trying to create Black communities. And not necessarily in like a fabricated way, but just introducing Black people, putting them together, helping them I feel like when it came to like helping Black people set up for success, they had good intentions. And in some parts of the country, they were successful. In other parts, though, this is where the hate comes in. In a lot of other parts, the people that were put in charge of the Black soldiers that came down from the Union to protect Black people's rights, the white men that was in charge of those soldiers were sometimes, most times, always colluding with planters and always colluding with legislators. And always, it was a constant thing that I noticed that doesn't get talked about enough. And it's just one of those things where it's like, oh, it's just white men being white men. But those are supposed to be people that we trusted. You know what I mean? Those are supposed to be people that we trusted. Um, a lot of the, mm, I like Thaddeus Stevens. I like that Thaddeus was a part of that. I love everything that he stood for. I think he was a great person. The fact that he was in charge, I like that he was in charge, and he made sure, at least as far as he could, that there was no corruption going on. That's that wherever he was, I say that there was no corruption, and he did not play about it. Like that's one thing I like about Thaddeus. It's so hilarious because it's a white man I'm talking about. But I'm so serious. Like anywhere he was, he made sure that no, you're going to treat these people right. You're not going to infringe on their rights. Like we gonna fucking talk about it. He created what was it? Oh, it was in Elaine. Damn. He created something for the farmers, something for farmers when Black people were trying to buy land in Elaine. But he helped create a lot of different like small bureaus or small associations for Black people, like getting us together. That's what I mean, like allowing us to get together and learn together and whatever. I do like certain parts of it, but when it comes to the Freedmen's Bureau, I just feel like maybe we just didn't need that help. It was almost like they had a silver spoon with a little bit of fucking sugar on it, and it was giving us a little bit and snatching it back. And it was almost like it just felt so performative to me. It just feels so performative. It's like Abraham Lincoln. It's
No,
just
I
like,
think it
yeah, you did
absolutely is.
good,
Because,
you know?
I mean, at the peak of their staffing, the Freedmen's Bureau had 900 staff members.
Right,
This is
right.
to, manage the entire former Confederacy and also provide like much needed aid to 4 million newly enslaved people or newly freed 4 million enslaved people. And so it's like, how is that ever going to possibly work? Like, you have to know. And I can't imagine that they thought that it would. Like as a logical person, like with a brain in your head, you can like see the number 900 and see the number 4 million and like see that that does not add up, like that just does not work together. So I just don't really understand what exactly they thought was going to happen.
It goes back to what I said. I think all of these plans were just mustered up overnight because like, oh shit, we won. Like it was really
Yeah,
one of those things like,
literally.
oh snap, that worked. Like, okay, now we got to figure out what to do with 4 million individuals that we don't trust, that we don't like. We just fought for them, but we gotta figure out what we're gonna do with them. Like
No.
literally, to the point where they were looking to send us west of them or east of the Mississippi, west of the Mississippi. Do you
Mhm.
know how much money it would have taken to send every 4 million Black people west of the Mississippi
Oh my
or
God.
even to
Trillion.
Liberia
Trillion.
or like listen like think about it. They did not these are that's I'm saying that because they did not think of this. They said okay, let's just look anywhere in the West Indies, anywhere South America, anywhere west of Mississippi. Okay, we can't do that because we got blah going over here and over here. It's like they did. I don't think they had a plan. I can't think of one that they tried and it didn't work, but it felt elaborate and it felt thought out. I can't think of one.
No,
No.
honestly, that's so true. I cannot think of one Reconstruction implementation that seems like it was created by someone who like had two brain cells to rub together. Like it seems
And
all just
for
like
longer
very
than 10
slapdash.
minutes.
Yeah, no, just like Chat GPT, write a Reconstruction plan for America. Like that's what it feels
Like
like.
literally. That probably actually go better. I
Yeah.
feel like the
No,
robots probably would have made a
honestly,
better decision.
the robot probably would have done it better. Like I can't imagine that anyone thought that this would work. And so that leads me to believe that they didn't. Like, and they just didn't really care. They were just like, we gotta, these, former Union soldiers, because the Freedmen's Bureau was mostly former Union soldiers. It's like, all right, these guys need jobs. We have to have a military presence in the South. I feel like it was mostly for show because they're thinking we have to have some military government presence in the South. We can't just leave them. We have to like pretend at least that we're there watching, but it was never going to really help. It's like when you like
And
tell
a
the
big thing
kids,
about have
hmm?
oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I used to be a nanny and I used to tell the kids that I would nanny that there's like secret cameras around the house and they let it like I can see what they're doing. There were no cameras. I feel like it's like that.
I feel like it was after all the things that I've read, I do feel like it was the North's way to ensure that the South wasn't making money. Because
Hmm.
the South had the capacity, like they could have easily said, "Fuck y'all, we gonna keep our slaves." They
Hmm.
could have easily done that. They had more than enough, right? I think it was the North. The North was very serious about the South not having slaves because the North just didn't have they didn't have the soil, they didn't have anything that the South had to have slaves. So it was more or less like if I gotta be broke, you gotta be broke. And Daddy said you can't do that, so I'm gonna go tell. So it was kind of one of those things where it's like it was in a way just like a cop out, just like, oh well, we tried, but I think it was also make sure them people ain't down there and they got no slave system. That's what I think it was. They sent just enough people to be in the right positions, rubbing shoulders and elbows with all these planters, these racist ass legislators. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? Like to make sure that there was no slave system. I don't. That's what I mean. Like I don't think that it was even they were even sent there to make sure Black people had their rights. Like otherwise, they would have understood that a lot of these Union soldiers are going to get killed. These are Black people fucking with racist ass white people, like Black boys, Black men with one gun, maybe 30 bullets, and you sent four of them to guard 3,000 Black people. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like I don't. That's why I don't think that it was even they were even there to make sure that Black people's rights weren't being infringed upon because they continue to infringe upon our rights, right? Nothing like you know what
They're
I
not
mean?
gonna do anything. What are they gonna do?
Right?
You would have need to have sent thousands, like hundreds of thousands of people for it to make any sort of impact, like whatsoever. You would have had to, they did technically implement martial law, but like you would have had to
Mm-hmm.
actually implement it in a way that is like being enforced throughout the entire South for years, for like a
And
decade.
not just send Black people. They have to understand that like those Black people needed that white person, that
Yeah.
white. I don't know how to explain it, but like
No, I
there
know exactly what you mean. Like they needed that authority that like
exactly,
from that other person because yeah, who's going to listen to all these black people? And
exactly.
realistically in the South, like who is going to take this guy's word like for law? You need
Mm-hmm.
that like authority figure, like almost like I work in marketing and whenever we're trying to send out like a press release or whatever, we always try and get, like an industry leader is what we say to endorse it because having that voice of authority like really helps when you don't have credibility. And it's,
Hmm.
these concepts change obviously as time goes on, but like the crux of it is the same.
Hmm. Very true. Very
Totally.
true. They didn't plan on that. I hate it. I
Mhm.
hate it.
They didn't plan it all. They should have at least made like a Pinterest board, if only.
Something, right? Why
A
not?
spreadsheet,
Make it cute.
like anything. I mean, and it's like these people could, these are supposed to be like the smartest guys ever. These are like, this is the Congress, the federal administration of the United States. Like these are supposed to be the top dogs, like
Hmm.
this, the smarties. These guys went to Harvard. Granted, going to Harvard was like they not that big of a deal back then, but still,
Right.
you would think they had like some semblance of a plan, but there was no plan. And so
Yeah, true.
I think that's really important. And kind of on that same topic. So obviously we've established that this is like a very fraught time in our history, loaded with all of these different questions, right? About like, what are we going to do with all of these people? What's the status of our country? Like, what's the status of our union? There's a lot of different questions that need to be addressed. And I honestly think like even the most savvy, smart world leaders would have trouble, contemplating. They would have to take time to like really think and like have a lot of input from other people. Andrew Johnson is not someone I would describe as a savvy world leader. He's not somebody who I would describe as like this, mastermind of equality and justice in the United States government. And so that has a huge impact. He was definitely not a champion of civil rights. He was an anti-secessionist, like he did not believe that the South should secede from the Union, but that had nothing whatsoever to do with like a moral obligation to like human rights
Hmm.
and ending, slavery in the South.
Remember, he called the Freedmen's Bureau treasonous. He said everybody
Mhm.
involved was committing treason.
Yeah, it
That's
literally.
fucking crazy.
So you kind of talked about this already, but being born to a like poor Tennessee farming family, he had this huge distaste for Southern elites. And where it's like one of those things where it's like, even with like racist people today or, closed-minded people today, it's like a lot of times they're almost there in terms of like class consciousness.
Yeah.
And it's like Andrew Johnson was really almost there. He like understands the problem with these monopolies. He understands the problem with big business, like taking everything away from the little guy. He's right there. But where he veers off into just like absolute insanity is he thinks that his class of people are the primary victims in this whole situation. Like he truly honestly believes that like these poor white farmers, like they are the victims. And that's just like totally nuts, of course. But what I want to ask is, do you think that his point of view is indicative of that of the rest of the poor white Southerners at the time? And how does this like kind of play into the pushback that we see during Reconstruction?
Ciao. Ciao. So you actually hit the nail on the head. Like, I don't even, honestly, when it comes to President Johnson, he, like I said, he did not care about Black people. And when you think about, you now have to, okay, first, forget what I just said. Seeing a Black person as a citizen, as a white person, I'm white, right? And I've never seen Black people as equals to me. One day, one day, I just have to embrace them, right?
Mhm.
I just have to fucking embrace them. They're humans. They have rights. They have rights. Like, that was revolutionary in itself. Like, what the
Yeah.
fuck, right? So, and it wasn't, that was not just the mindset of, the big rich families of the South. That was the mindset of almost every white person in this country, with the exception of the Quakers, right? Some of the Quakers. Andrew Johnson was not exempt from that. A lot of broke families, a lot of broke white families actually did not like that these rich families had slaves, because they did not have slaves. It
Right.
wasn't the fact that they had slaves. It was, I don't have slaves, but you have slaves,
What
right?
those slaves represented in terms of like their wealth.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it was just like, it was never with him, and him being the head of the state, head of the government, and putting into play of so many different fucking laws, and so much change in this country. His mindset is exactly what this new construction is built off of. His
Mhm.
mindset of, I don't like you because I don't like that you have that, not because it's wrong that you have it. It's because I don't have it. Is
Right.
that not the world we live in today? Do we not
Absolutely.
have a lot of people that's anti-billionaires, and let's eat the rich until they get rich?
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, and it truly does breed into what we have today. It truly does. Like that baseline of his character, that flaw is just it stained America even further. And we could have gotten so much more done with the right person in office. And because of him, we live in what we have today. We
Hmm.
like literally like, oh my God. Like, oh my
Yeah.
God.
No, literally because of like he paved the way for like the injustice that we see now. And I think that this view of white Southerners, it never really like left. And I think because the Confederacy lost the war, like this idea kind of like took shape of like what it would have been like if they won. This whole like these like antebellum South parties and all of this stuff, like that wasn't really popular before the Civil War. This like Gone with the Wind style like reverence to antebellum South was not really a thing. But during Reconstruction is when we really see these ideas start to take shape, especially with poor white Southerners who would have never even been in that position in the first place. Now we have these, Southern white people who maybe never even were, pro-Confederacy thinking like, oh, well, imagine like if we had won, like the South will rise again, like all of these different things. And I think this has a lot to do with the fact that the war was mostly fought in the South. And the South was literally destroyed. I mean, think about what war does to anywhere. We'll put up some pictures here for the viewer about like, just different ways that the infrastructure was really torn apart. I mean, the entire railroad system in the South, for example, was completely demolished by Union soldiers, like in an act of war, which is what you do when you're fighting a war. But we have these poor white Southerners who were already poor, and now their house is destroyed. They're going through famine. It doesn't mean they're not racist. We don't feel bad for them. Doesn't mean that they're not assholes. But it's, this situation where now there needs to be a scapegoat. And I think that that's like breeding a lot of the hostility, especially as we see, and we're going to talk about this more in a second, especially as we see Black people taking their place in society through starting businesses, gaining wealth, buying land, being elected to public office. And now you have these poor white people whose, lives were effectively ruined by the Civil War thinking, well, what the hell happened here? It's like it all gets flipped on its head. And I think that that attitude is pervasive today. I think that's why we see people with those ugly ass Confederate flag t-shirts with that Confederate flag wasn't even the one that they were using in the Civil War. It's a completely like racist derivative that was created in the, late 20th century. Just absolutely ridiculous. But I think that this or why we have antebellum South parties at Alabama University, frat parties with a Gone with the Wind theme. What the fuck is that? It's just absolutely ridiculous. And so I really think that we need to examine as a society, why do we have this mindset of longing for this like Southern society that never existed? What the society that they're longing for in the South, these, poor white people, is not one that ever really existed at all. And so
Yeah.
I just kind of went on a little rant, but I was wondering if you could speak on that a little bit.
You're fine. So okay. Okay. What's the question in it?
The question is, do you think that this class divide amongst white Southerners extended to Black Americans as they began to like hold political office? And how do we like when this kind of pushback that we're going to talk about starts against Black communities, how does that play into like this class consciousness sort of situation that we're seeing initially between the poor white farmers and the wealthy planters?
Yeah. So I feel like not even feel, I know. When Black people actually started to exercise their rights, when Black people even got their rights, fuck it. Like they just got them right. A lot of the white people in this country looked at it as, okay, so now I'm equal to that person. Now, in a way, you're degrading me because you gave this person rights and citizenship. Not only that, I have to now compete for jobs. I have to compete for all types of shit with this person that's not even a person. I don't even think this person's person just because you said it. Now I have to, and it's that did kind of play into like the politics and how Black people were perceived, and also not to mention how white people were perceiving themselves. If you sided with Black people, you were just like us.
Hmm.
You too were a nigger. Excuse my French. Literally. They called white or nigger lovers, right? Carpetbaggers, all of these stupid ass names, right? And I feel like when it came to politics, luckily the Republican Party took control, right? And I like that they kept the bearings, but and it could have definitely been worse. It could have definitely been worse.
Of course, the main point is that we're still seeing this today, especially I would say with this, radical Republican base that we're seeing now. And for the listener who's not aware, we're not really going to get into this, but the party switched after the Great Depression. So we're talking about Republicans as being like the progressive union, some of them anti-slavery party, and then the Democrats are the Southern Confederate racist people. This switched in the after the Great Depression. We're not going to really get into it right now, but Republicans now basically are not all Republicans. I mean, I'm not trying to like alienate anybody, but like let's just say it how it is. The Republicans that we're seeing now, especially like the MAGA triple Trumpers, are essentially the same vibe as the Southern Democrats during Reconstruction. And we're seeing this resurgence of like the South will rise again, like all of this weird kind of language around this society in the South that never existed. And it's almost like what they're envisioning is a South that never had any Black people in it to begin with. And the thing is, that would not be possible because Black people quite literally built the American South. Like enslaved people literally built $1 trillion in today's money economy in the American South. And everything that you're envisioning as this like antebellum, gone with the wind, like aesthetic Southern experience would not exist without Black people.
But you know what? That's not what they're talking about.
Mhm.
They are okay with us building it. We've done
Mhm.
our job. We've overstayed our welcome. That's where they are.
You're welcome when you didn't even choose to come here in the fucking first
Right.
place.
Fuck, this is my house now. Like, I'm
Yeah.
so confused.
No, literally. And I think it brings back to this pattern that we touched on in the beginning of a lot of white people are okay with using Black people for their labor, allowing them to build these societies that are very, very like successful, but then they want them to leave.
Yeah.
And
And not just societies, shit, organizations, companies,
of course,
anything.
oh, yes, exactly.
Anything.
And so, do you think that this like plays into the violence that we're seeing in like this violent pushback that we're going to talk about in Reconstruction? And what do you think? Like, do you think there's a difference between the wealthy white planter and the poor Southern farmer in the way that they're reacting to some of these, implementations during Reconstruction?
I feel like I said, I think there's two different sides. From what I've read is broke Southern white families, they didn't necessarily resent rich white families. They wanted to be in with it. They
Yeah,
were
they wanted to
they
emulate them.
literally like they would go so far to even pretend to be right because it was a social thing. They weren't on the eat the rich. They were, I want to be part of that, right? And the
Mhm.
closest I am, the better, right? So if I can align my views and values with yours, yeah, Black people don't deserve rights. They are peasants, even though that broke ass white person is probably on the same level as this broke ass Black person,
Mhm.
but they wanted to be close to that like that what is it called? It's like that social class where this
This
kind of like
tax
kings and
bracket,
queens.
this they wanted to emulate this, ideal of like this
Yeah.
wealthy rich planter. And I think we see
Yes.
that today. Like I think, we see like the people voting for Trump who are, poor white people living in the South. What the fuck do you have in common with a
Because
billion?
at least I have this in common.
Yeah.
Because at least I can say I agree with them and they agree with me, right?
Mhm.
Now when it comes to the rights and amendments,
Mhm.
oh yeah. I
Mhm.
watched a 2 hour video on YouTube about Reconstruction, just kind of like just to graze my intellect.
Yeah. Oh wait,
And
and so did I. Was it the PBS one with Harry Lewis
I
Gates?
think it was PBS.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a quote that they said, and it was, I forgot what it was. It was a Southern planter, and it was, I and the nigger. The only thing that's between I and the nigger is the almighty dollar,
Hmm.
right? And he said it in a way where it was like he couldn't believe it. He was, when I tell you the idea of Black people being human and having citizenship was revolutionary, that's where there's a difference. I think now, of course, the slave owners, of course, they felt the same way, but it was on a different level because to them, they weren't doing anything wrong. The more I look into the antebellum South and I actually read, instead of reading Black Black scholars start to read white scholars, it really puts it
Jesus,
in
that must
perspective
be.
that these people didn't know. Of course, they knew what they were doing was wrong, but
They would
they weren't.
justify it.
Exactly. And that's what the Protestant used to be. That Protestant Christianity was just justify your bad doings with the
Yes.
Bible,
Actually, I'm
literally,
so
right?
happy you brought this up because I wanted to talk about the Bible and the way that Christianity, specifically this brand of like Southern evangelical Protestant Christianity, goes into slavery. And you see it all the time. When you read records, like I would encourage anyone who's listening to just like, there's hundreds of archives of historical records and diaries and all these different things written by Southern slave owners. And you can tell that they like kind of know in the back of their mind that this is fucked up. Like, for example, they never refer to the enslaved people that they owned as slaves. They always say like my boys or my servants or whatever. They never say my slaves because they
Mhm.
know that it's kind of fucked up to have slaves. Even like in the tiniest little, like the one brain cell they have that's working, they know that this is not cool. And you can see there's archives of homilies or like sermons given at white Baptist churches during the, slavery era in the American South. And they talk about how the Bible says, has rules about owning slaves. And as long as you follow these rules, then you are absolved of like any wrongdoing. And so
And
it's
the
like these,
story of Ham. They use that
yes.
story of Ham a lot.
Oh
Like
my
that was
God,
their
they wore
very
that
reason.
bitch out.
Listen, I don't even think they quite understood the true story of Ham and how it came from the Kemetic Egyptian. Like I think they're very it's
Would you actually
they're,
explain that for the listener really quick? Because I think it's kind of obscure.
so in the story of Ham is a story of Noah. Noah had three sons. One of his sons, and each of his sons represented a different race. This is how you know this that white people fuck this story up.
Mhm.
Race is such a new concept.
Yeah, there was no translation for the
Right.
ancient Hebrew
but
in
but
race.
according to the Protestant Christians, Noah had three sons. One of his sons represented the white race. One of his other sons represented, I believe, it was the browner skin, so like Native Americans, Middle Eastern, and Asians. And then
Mhm.
one of his other sons, Ham, he ruled or represented black people.
Mhm.
One day, while Noah was drunk, he passed out. His son Ham saw him naked.
Mhm. Yeah.
So God cursed Ham and said, all of your children and everyone that you represent will be enslaved. So white Protestants took that as God said Noah's other son was supposed was supposed to enslave his brother's kids and the people he represents.
Mhm.
That's the story of of Ham.
Yeah.
Black people are Ham. We saw our father naked, so God cursed us with slavery. That's why white people enslaved us because God told Noah's other son to
Yeah.
a
And what a
child.
stupid fucking story. Like,
I
let's just
swear
be real.
to
What a disaster of a translation that probably was. And also, it's just like we can go on about this for hours because there's this huge,
literally.
huge, I guess, idea of like these, Christian evangelicals taking the Bible and like finding these pieces that exactly justify, and it's not just with racism. You can see this with homophobia, with misogyny, with violence against women, with even, things like incest. You can find these little passages in the Bible that like kind of justify whatever it is that you're trying to do. And then they take that shit and they just run with it beyond. And this is not a new concept. That's the thing that I want to impress on like the viewers is we think of this as like a new concept in line with like the evangelical megachurch Southern Christians. This has been going on since like the Puritans, like since the very beginning of the colonization of America. This has been
Colonization of
happening.
Africa.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. This idea that you can justify whatever you want as long as it's in the Bible.
Yep. Yep. And also this idea that since Christianity, I mean, this is off course of Reconstruction, but I'll land it here. Um, since this idea of Christianity was introduced to Black people through Europe, right? First introduced through Ethiopia, and then they brought it down, right? And so when you come down, you meet a new people, you can tell them and show them anything. I can show you a picture of fucking Madonna right now and tell you that
Right.
this is Mother Earth because you
Right.
don't know, right? So when that is used, it is like, well, this is what God looks like. This man told us to do this to you.
Yeah.
And not only that, he gave us better means to do so. He blessed us with guns. He's blessed us with all of these means to actually like dominate you, murder you, massacre you, and he's also blessing us with the ability to do so. You know what I mean? Like we've won. We've won because God is blessing us because we're doing what He wants us to do. So like that's the mindset like that. But I'll land that there. I don't want to get
Yeah.
too deep into it.
No, I mean, I'm glad you brought it up because I wanted to bring this up and I didn't actually put it in the outline, but I wanted to briefly discuss the role that Black churches had in Reconstruction because obviously Christianity was forced on the, trafficked enslaved people from Africa. Like they were not Christians when they came here, but it was this idea that was enforced upon them by the slave owner. And I think this is maybe one of the most critical blunders that you could possibly make as somebody who's trying to own and subjugate an entire other group of people is teaching them a religion that, for the most part preaches, love and acceptance, when you really look at the Bible. And so, as Black communities do time and time again, they took that and they totally ran with it and developed their own version of Christianity and spirituality, which is something that really helped guide through these like really troubling times. And especially in Reconstruction, Black churches were a gathering place and a political space for these groups of people. So I was wondering if you could speak on like the role that Black churches had in Southern communities for a little bit.
Yeah, so the Black church, I say, had the largest hand in empowering my people. I would say that was also a very large tool because at one point we were only allowed to read the Bible.
Hmm.
Those that didn't know how to read only knew the words in the Bible, and they only knew how to structure the words in the Bible, how the words in the Bible were. They didn't know how to put it in other contexts, right? When I tell you education was so important, it's crazy. And the Black church was, like you said, a place for us to convene. It was a place for us to learn. It was more than a church. This was somewhere that like a lot of Black churches in the South. That's why a lot of reasons why people burned these churches is because they were used multi-use. It was everything you can fucking think of. It was a place to actually go to to cast your vote. A lot of times that I just learned recently, a lot of Black people would get their registration, their voter, or whatever, take it back to the local church, and everybody fill it out, and then they march back down together to cast their vote. So, like when you think about it, these churches were used as schools. It was used as safe, just a borderline safe haven, right? And also, it was a way for us to unified spiritually. Black people and humans in general, we're very spiritual. Now I don't know so much if we're on the same listen, but I do I do feel like we Black people have always been disconnected from our spiritual practice, and we found a way to connect with one another with something that was given to us to enslave us. I think us changing the trajectory of Christianity and how it impacts our community was crucial in Reconstruction because the church was literally invented to keep us enslaved. Like so a lot of times a lot of slave owners would literally rip out pages of the Bible.
Yes,
They
I'm glad
created a
you said that.
slave Bible. Like so many like all of these different efforts to make sure that this church was indenturing the servitude, okay?
Mhm.
And for us to have like taken that and use it as a safe haven and what we want it to be. We've done it with so much in this country. We will take something so ugly and turn it around and make it work for us. And I love that. I think we don't talk about churches enough when we talk about Reconstruction because it's not supposed to be religious and it's not about religion. It's just fact. It's
Mhm.
fucking fact.
Yes.
There's so much power in the Black church. And when we talk about Black history in general, there's a reason that those are the first places that they target because that's where we convene. That's our safe haven, right? Like
Exactly.
think about it. That guy, the Charleston shooter back in 2016, he chose a church, not a school where he could probably off a bunch of other kids, not a grocery store. He chose a church, and
Yes.
the significance of that church, like there, I think the Black church was a crucial part, a key part in Reconstruction, a key
Absolutely.
part in Reconstruction.
I'm so happy you actually mentioned that, especially as this like political space as well, because it really ties in perfectly to what I want to talk about next, which is the 15th Amendment, voting rights, and kind of like this advancement of formerly enslaved people and Black Americans into political office. So, for those who don't know, the 15th Amendment was ratified in 1870. So, this is like quite a few years after the end of the Civil War. I feel like there's this misconception that it was like the Civil War ends and then like boom, 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 you have the 14th, 15th, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. That is not the case. It takes a long time for these things to get passed. So the 15th Amendment, which was the last amendment that was passed, was ratified in 1870, which gave Black men the right to vote in the United States. And so this was obviously super critical for the advancement of Black Americans during Reconstruction. While this amendment did only grant Black men the right to vote, not women, there are many historical records of voting in Black communities being like this community activity, mostly centered around the church. So there's like quite a few historical records showing that when an election was coming up, Black communities would gather like men, women, and sometimes like children and teenagers in the church, go over the ballot and like collectively decide who it is they're going to vote for, and then go all together down to the polls. And this like allowed for these huge political gains. I'm going to list a couple off right now. In South Carolina, voters elected a Black majority House of Representatives. So, for context, the first Black representative in South Carolina was elected during Reconstruction. The second one after that, I think we talked about this in our last call, was elected in 1992.
Mhm.
So
Very.
there's this period where these people are getting together, figuring out who they want to vote for, and realizing that they have power in this system and using their power to progress themselves like further along in this political hierarchy and social hierarchy. Additionally, throughout Reconstruction, in the election of I think it was like 1872 or something, 1,500 Black people were holding political office nationwide. So this is like huge. This is major. So I was kind of wondering if you would just speak about, you kind of already did, but like the mindset, the community mindset that kind of like drove this, because you don't see white people doing this. Like you don't see, I mean, maybe sometimes in like the women's suffrage movement, but like barely. This is like a very unique thing, I would say.
Yeah, this was and I hate to keep using this word, but I'm not using it lightly. It was revolutionary.
Absolutely.
Not only did we have the right to vote, we had the right to run for office. And when you think about it, you have 4 million Black people concentrated within maybe what, 5 or 6 states,
Hmm.
right? Um,
A
you,
majority almost in every state.
right, exactly. So that was where we saw a lot of murders, a lot of massacres, a lot of fear. That was when we saw the birth of I was going to say birth of a nation, but the birth of the KKK, which
Right.
ironically, um, it, it it was a good thing. And I always say, and as a community, Black people will take 10 steps forward and then they'll knock us the fuck
Mhm.
out. And then
Yeah.
they'll run 1,000 steps ahead of us, right? Um, and that's exactly what happened. So, like a lot of times, and this was also endorsed a lot of like President, who was it, Monroe? One of these presidents, like actually, what was his name?
Oh, I know what you're going to talk about. I actually have it on here to talk about next. What was his name? James. I
Was
know
it Monroe?
it was Rutherford B. Hayes, I think is who you're trying to talk about.
Mm.
The guy who got elected after Johnson.
Yes, yes, but like when you think about like the amount of endorsements, the amount of high power
Mhm.
people that was against Black people running for office and willing to actually put their fucking job title and position on the line to say, don't let that shit happen. Do what you can to make sure that don't happen. And when you tell a racist white person that first of all never gave a fuck about Black people to do what they can to stop a Black person, what do you think is going to happen, right?
They're going to
Like,
do
and that's exactly the mindset of this country. Like, there has always been dog whistles, and it's like you give us the right to run for office, you give us the right to vote, and then you tell a few presidents down, they tell these white people, okay, go ahead and take their right from them, go
yeah.
take their right. You a few steps forward, knock us the fuck down, and run forward. Like that's exactly what happens all throughout history when involving Black people. It's just like the I guess like the difference in community obviously was white people didn't want Black people to be president. They didn't want us to be in the Congress, anything like that. But then there was also that thing of like that fear that we could. You know what I mean? Like I think the fear is what we don't talk about enough. Is like it's hard to admit, but white people were scared as fuck of Black people because how dare
Sure.
they?
Yeah.
18 months ago, you were enslaved, you were in chains, and now you're running for Congress. Like, do you know that's a scary motherfucker? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and it's just like that. I think that that's an obvious divide in the community, but like in the Black community, I do know, like during this time, we were the strongest. We were our strongest, I can say. Like we found our alliances. We felt we were able to actually get shit done. I can say that
Mhm.
we were
It
able to
kind
get
of
shit done.
makes me wonder, and this is like not really even something that I wrote down, but it makes me think about like, I don't know if this is going to come out coherent because it literally just popped in my head. But do you think that when we're talking about the average white Southerner who is usually going to be like a poor planter, you see, they've seen their family struggle for years and years and not really move up in society. And then they see this emancipation of enslaved people and they see how quickly they were able to make progress. Do you think that there's like a level of like jealousy or like, resentment
Absolutely.
there? As like,
Oh,
how did
and
they
there
do?
was. And I'm not the video I watched on YouTube. Even I've watched. There was a couple like diary excerpts
Yeah.
that the narrator had read,
Hmm.
um, and that absolutely was the problem because white people, their mindset was, at least I'm white. I'm broke as hell. I have no slaves. They look down upon me, but at least I'm white, right?
Hmm.
And that whiteness was their currency because it would get them further than their black counterpart, right? Free or not, right? But
Yeah.
now you got these free people, these black people, and now you all have the exact same rights. You all have the exact same
And
rights.
look
So
at how
now
much
there's,
better
like you
they're
said,
doing than your asses.
exactly. And like the guy said, there's nothing between me and this black man now, but $1. And that's way too close.
Yeah.
And that's way too close. And then not to mention, there was so many different times, like we can talk about Oscarville. I just made a video today about it. Like, all the different black communities that started to thrive immediately after the Civil
Yeah.
War. A lot of these black or these white neighbors, like the neighboring counties and neighboring whatever the fuck, like they would literally collude together to make sure black people can't get supplies, that they can't build railroads through their cities, that they can't, like, there was so many different efforts that would point toward a jealousy because there was no reason to, right? There was no black people, we minded our business. We didn't start wanting to like go to their neighborhoods until like the 60s when we realized that y'all got some nice shit around here.
Hmm.
Fuck, like, hell yeah, I'm trying to get some of this. But like back in the day when we first got free, we wanted to stay far away from them people because what the fuck is wrong with them? You know what
Hmm.
I mean? Like we wasn't. It was white people in our business, and then that's where I say, yeah, there was obviously some jealousy or something,
Yes,
something.
absolutely. So this ties in perfectly to what I had up next here, which is obviously it's no secret that like everyone knows. I think if you even know like if you know basically nothing about Reconstruction, you know about like the Jim Crow era and you know about the KKK and these like extreme terrorist acts and like these really, really violent actions that were taken against Black people. But I think that a lot of people have a misconception as to like why this was. And I think you explained it perfectly. It's this, why not me? This can't possibly happen. Like this group of people can't possibly be, more successful than I am because I'm white. That's like the crux of the situation. And I think it's like really one of the most devastating aspects of Reconstruction is that the more power Black people gained, the more like their literal lives were at risk. And it's just like it's a really interesting juxtaposition, I would say, because at this same time, Black people are gaining immense political power, and this is like referred to as the golden age of Reconstruction. And so I was wondering in that context if you could like kind of explain the complexities behind this idea that there was a golden age of Reconstruction.
I feel like calling it the golden age is offensive. I'm
Hmm.
not gonna lie to you. I don't think it was golden for anybody. I think that it was illuminating, if you want to use the word golden in a literal sense. It was pretty, it shed some light on some things. But like I said previously, I feel like it was more or less golden in the sense that we find gold, we discover gold and we steal it, right?
Right.
I think that is what makes it golden, but I don't, I no, I don't.
It's not. And the thing is, like referring to it, I think, as like this golden age of Reconstruction implies that like this government did something right, when that's really
Exactly.
not the case. It's really more
Exactly.
that like Black communities and formerly enslaved people saw this opportunity and jumped at it in a way that is really like revolutionary, like how you said. It's not, it has nothing really to do with the government at all. It doesn't mean that the government was doing anything right. And I think it's important to note as well that there were many, many violent attacks by, the KKK, et cetera. But in addition to this, the former state governments that were set up by Andrew Johnson while the Congress was in recess, they would implement laws known as black codes. And I think we're all familiar with the term black codes, but I don't think that we all really understand like the severity. I remember like learning about it and like learning that it kind of like, you know, made it so that people couldn't really vote and it was like not good, but I don't think we really fully understand what that totally meant. And so really what they were was designed to keep Black Americans in a position of servitude. And the governments in these former Confederate states were putting these in place to appease white former slave owners.
The large part of Reconstruction that I don't hear mentioned enough is that it needed to be reconstructed. The Civil War ruined the South.
Yeah,
It ruined the South. Not just in a monetary way, in a lot of ways. A lot of cities and towns were burnt down. They
yeah,
were
raised to the
abandoned,
ground.
literally. So what was needed was labor, right? And this is when America started to scatter to figure out what to do with their free black people, right? And that's also when America tried to enslave Asian immigrants.
Yeah.
Oddly enough,
Yeah, the
which went
Chinese through the, what was it? The Transcontinental Railroad.
exactly
Yeah.
right. So it was I feel like there was an obvious need to rebuild the South, and this is where I say none of the presidents that put Reconstruction into play ever cared about black people because they knew somebody would have to build that up.
Hmm.
They knew that it
And
was
they
not
knew it
going to
wasn't going to be them.
exactly like they literally like they knew that. And I think that's why a large part of me say that the freeing of black people was literally just a money move. But when it comes to like black codes and stuff like that, the black codes and the pig laws and things like that were all put in place to make sure that the South gets rebuilt, because at the end of the day the South is the most lucrative part of this country. Now, you may not be able to use slaves, but you have the soil, right? You have the means. You got the definitely got the power, right? The South fought a good fight in the Civil War. That's not talked about enough. The Confederates fought a good fight in the Civil War.
Hmm.
So there was money still to be made, and there were still people there to make it. And the country, and that's why I say Abraham Lincoln knew what he was doing, putting that loophole in the 13th Amendment.
Hmm.
There was still a way to make sure that it gets reconstructed. And when
Hmm.
it comes to what was it, the black codes and how they affected the black community, it did its job. And if you, I don't have my book with me, but if you want to know a couple examples, like for instance, we were talking about the poor white families, right? So if say there was a black family and the child was caught playing, if the dad and the mom didn't come right then and there, that child could be kidnapped and basically put to work.
Hmm.
And that is another form of slavery, right?
Yeah.
It was illegal to be unemployed. That is where we get a lot of the we get job contracts from. That's where we get
And
references from.
not only was it illegal to be unemployed, but you had to be employed by a white
But
person.
yes, very true. And you can't. It was illegal to employ a white person. There's so many stupid black codes, and there's lists. And not to mention, I just learned every city had their own black codes.
Hmm.
So when I tell you there could be hundreds of black codes. And it was literally just a way to make sure that, first of all, black people are never able to fully exercise their rights. And it
Hmm.
was also to make sure that the South gets reconstructed. I think that's why they call it Reconstruction. It wasn't about, oh, giving black people their rights. It was about rebuilding the South because
Yeah.
that was the bank. That was where the
Rebuilding
money
the
was coming
South
from.
in the same image that it was prior.
Exactly.
Nobody was thinking about rebuilding it in this new image of equality and transparency and, justice for everybody. It was
Exactly.
rebuilding the South like how it was in the past, which was never going to work. It was never going to, that's like anti the entire fucking point. If you're
Literally
like,
made the war a
fight this war
contradiction.
for? It's like full of contradictions. And there's this very, especially with the labor contracts, there's this story that's always stuck with me about there was this who was it who was leading the Freedmen's Bureau, like Oliver something? Oliver Otis Howard. Okay, so this guy, Oliver Otis Howard, he was like a very staunch abolitionist, like kind of one of the good ones, I think you could say, but still a white person in the 1800s. So, like take it with a grain of salt. But this guy was charged with leading the Freedmen's Bureau. And he was a huge proponent of the 40 acres and a mule, which was, for the people who don't know, is there was this kind of like idea being floated around that all of the emancipated slaves would be given 40 acres and a mule to like kind of start their new life. Now, this never really came to fruition, but of course, like word travels super fast, in these communities. And there's not like a really like good way to get news out. It's not like people have like an iPhone and they get a push notification. So, once once Black communities heard this, they were like, bet, we're gonna
And
go
they went and
take
found
back
some
this
land.
land. And so, especially like the main thing was that Black communities would be given land that was seized from the Confederates during the Civil War. So there's this specific community that took up on like this plot of land. I don't remember what exactly it was called, but they like totally made their own community. Like they had their
Are you
own,
talking about Campbell? I feel like
yes,
yeah, out of the Georgia Islands. That was like Tybee Island and Saint.
yes.
I forgot what the other one. Yeah, I know what you're talking
Yeah. And there's this story of this guy, Oliver Otis. He had to go and essentially tell this group of people that they couldn't stay here because it was going to be illegal if they were not under contract with a white, with a white person. And so it's his job essentially to go and deliver this terrible news to this group of people. And there's transcripts from his diary that have been like archived now where he talks about what it was like to go do this. And he says that he goes there and he delivers this horrible news, and especially the fact that a lot of people were going to be sent back to the very same plantation that they had been enslaved on prior. And he says it's just total dead silence, in the room. And then this older woman starts singing Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, which is like a very prominent spiritual. And everybody starts joining in and singing Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen. And he said he left and he just started sobbing, crying. And I think that that's just like, I love reading firsthand accounts because I think it really puts you into the time frame. And like, can you imagine, and like, not just you, but I'm talking to like the viewer as well. Imagine that. Like, imagine both sides. Imagine delivering the news and imagine being the people there and
about. Right.
learning after building this beautiful life for yourself over the past couple of months, you are going to now go back to this life of like terror and violence and mistreatment, and knowing that there's like really not a whole lot you can do about it.
Yeah. Very true. I feel like there was also a lot of resentment on behalf of the planters who lost their land. I feel like that was also something like they did not, like I said, that quote, there's nothing between me and the black man but the almighty dollar. To even sit down and to negotiate contracts with somebody that you don't think is a human, I feel like that is something that
Hmm.
isn't talked about, like that feeling of having to do something
Hmm.
that you don't even believe in. Like you now have to do something that you don't even believe in. And I
Hmm.
think that's where a lot of the um I guess you could say like a lot of the disconnect came with the contracts and these planters. It wasn't like, oh, they both mutually agreed. Yeah, the black people agreed, but that's because I'm not trying to go to jail, right? And I
Right.
have a
Or it's
family
going to be, it's like you either go work for this planter and make pennies on the dollar, or you go
and
to
do
jail
it
and you
and
work
take
for the
whatever they
same
give you.
planter,
Mm-hmm.
like for no money. It's basically the same result. You either make a little bit of money or you make none.
We literally, yeah, yeah, and that's why we have black codes. That's how we had that
Hmm.
first. I guess you wouldn't call it a prison boom because they weren't really ready. They weren't really focused on filling up prisons. Like I said, they were
They didn't
focused
even
on
really have
reconstructing the
them.
South. Exactly. So, like during this time, the Black Codes era, that's when a lot of Southern planters were literally just doing business with local enforcements, right?
Hmm.
Local police and sheriffs and stuff like that because the South had to reconstruct. Before the Civil War even began, the price of a slave went up, what, 40%,
Hmm.
45%? Think about the amount of money that the South was making just the 5 years before the Civil War, right? And
Hmm.
the issue was the South wasn't required to give any of that money to the North. They didn't have to pay federal taxes and like
Right.
that, right? And that was the whole point of all this is that the North was broke as hell and they saw the South thriving individually. So okay, let's have how about we all put our money together. Now you got the South part of the Union. Now we have our money together. We got to get this labor back, right? And
Right.
that was a way that I could say Reconstruction was weaponized. I think that it was just like a shiny little coin just dangled in our face to make it seem like we're doing this for you, we're doing this for you, but really it was for the money. It was for the almighty dollar.
100%. And I think that I wanted to talk a little bit about this, shift that we see because there's many stages to Reconstruction. I think there's like this misconception that it was like 5 years, but it was like really a couple decades that this was all going on. And so there's several elections happening during this time, and the most prominent shift, I would say, happens right before the next presidential election. So, or maybe even the midterms, I would say. So basically, there is this large economic crash that happens. It's like the economic panic of 1873. So this is like the prelude to the Great Depression, but it's like a pretty serious economic downturn that happened in the United States. A lot of people lose their jobs, like the stock markets, which are very new to begin with, totally crash. It's kind of like a fucking disaster. It's like a mini Great Depression. And so I always say on my channel, economic turmoil and political unrest go hand in hand for creating catastrophic situations. And I think that that's absolutely what happened here. And before we leave, I just wanted to kind of talk about, and I think this is a good place to end too, because I think on the next episode we can get in really to like the downfall of Reconstruction and like what the parallels are to today. But before we leave, I wanted to talk about this like economic downturn and how this impacted both the poor white Southerners and the Black community, and how this kind of like helped to turn poor white Southerners even more against the Black community than they already were in the first place.
I think the issue was that there was no cohesion.
Mhm.
Nobody really agreed with the terms. The black people did not want to be on that plantation, and the white people did not want to pay those black people. They did not want them on their plantation as freed people.
Mhm.
And I think that when it comes to like the racial violence that we'll be talking about in the next episode and stuff like that, that all came because there was no connection, there was no cohesion. Like it was a simply, I'm only doing this because I got to. Okay, well I'm only doing this because I got to. And there was, you know what I mean? It was kind of like a I don't know, like it felt like a task more or less than a effort to work together to rebuild their home. And I mean their home as in the South, you know what I mean? But yeah, that's how I feel.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we've been talking for 2 hours now, so thank you
It's
so much.
always a pleasure.
It is. I mean, you once you get into it, you just can't get out. Um,
Right.
but thank you so much for talking to me about this, and for all of our viewers, join us for the next episode, which is going to be a real like compare and contrast to these kind of this revocation of rights that we see in the post-Reconstruction era, and like comparing it to what we're seeing today in the modern day. I think it's very important for people to realize historical context beyond situations. So we're going to really dive into that. Thank you so much, Chemistry, for joining me. If anybody wants
Absolutely.
to donate to the nonprofit or check out the website, the link will be in the show notes, as well as all of our social profiles.
Okay. It's been a pleasure. I'll talk to you later. We'll schedule. We'll
Yeah.
schedule.
Right.
Bye.